Okay, well, greetings, Bob Chapman and Raj Sisodia. I am so happy to engage with you on something that I have titled Conscious Capitalism Through the Lens of a New Paradigm. First, let me welcome you. Welcome, Raj. Welcome, Bob. Thank you for taking the time for this conversation.
We look forward to it.
Thank you, David. Happy
And
to be
I
with you.
want to give a little preamble to explain this lens of the new paradigm. um, Part of our conversation. And I think that conscious capitalism and is a well-known movement, thanks to you and many others, Raj. And Barry Wehmiller is a star attraction of the conscious capitalism movement, thanks to you, Bob. And so this is well known. You've written a beautiful book on the topic. It's been the subject of a Harvard Business Review case report. So what could be new about that? And I think that what I want to emphasize in this conversation is that despite the success of companies that follow this conscious capitalism movement, it is always against the stream of the mainline business ethos. And this is reflected in your story. So Raj, if I understand your story correctly, you found yourself in an American business school almost by accident, and you were repelled by the entire ethos of marketing. And it was in your search for companies that don't do it that way that you found those companies, and then that became the conscious capitalism movement. Is that a fair statement of your personal journey?
I think it is, David, because as you said, I ended up at Columbia University somewhat accidentally. I didn't know you could get a PhD in business, and one day a group of my friends in Mumbai were dressed up and going somewhere on a day we didn't have any classes, and I asked them, and they said, yeah, we're going to the US Information Agency to get GMAT application so we can apply for a PhD. I said, oh, I didn't know you can do that. If you give me 5 minutes, I'll come with you. Because I had lived in the States as a kid. And so for me, it was suddenly a golden ticket back to the US. And so I did that, and I'm the only one from that group of 8 who ended up coming, ironically enough. So my life completely changed because of that accidental encounter that morning. And I came to Columbia in New York City in the early 1980s, 1981, which was the beginning of what would later be called the decade of greed. We had the movie Wall Street and the famous speech, "Greed is good." You had Jack Welch at General Electric, who really kind of hardwired this mentality of shareholder value being the only and paramount purpose of business. And I could see kind of the mania, the marketing mania, I call it, the crazy amount of money that was being spent on ads and coupons and junk mail, and everywhere you looked, you were inundated. And I came from a country which had very little of that at that time. India was still kind of a closed economy, so the contrast was dramatic. And I soon started asking the question, what are we spending and what are we getting and what's the impact? And over time, I developed almost a kind of antipathy and a degree of shame about my profession, because I said we're not having a positive impact on people. We're using women's bodies to sell products. We're getting kids hooked on junky, foods, and we're creating a culture which is all about materialistic consumption, and people are becoming unhappy and unhealthy and so forth. And so I had this inner dialogue that my father got a PhD in agriculture science and he was trying to cure world hunger, and I got a PhD in marketing and I'm just trying to sell you more junk that you don't need. You know? And so that hunger for some kind of meaning and purpose was innate in me. I didn't have the language to say I need meaning and purpose, but I was always asking, is there a better way? Can we do this differently? And that is a powerful question, I think, in any scenario to ask, because the answer is always yes. And in my case, I was looking at companies that did not spend all this crazy amount of money. I mean, I was stunned when I did a study and I found that we were spending $1 trillion a year in 2004 on ads and coupons and junk mail. And that was more than the GDP of India. Okay, so a billion people were living on less than what we were spending on
Yeah,
ads, coupons, and junk
yeah.
mail. And I said, what are we
Sir,
getting for that? Is it great for customers, great for companies, great for society? And the answer was no.
so you had to flee business as usual to find conscious businesses. And you, Bob, tell me you're not an egghead. You're a down-to-earth guy. What you've done is based on a series of revelations. And I remember from your book that you said that as someone who's deeply inspired by Christian values, your pastor has access to his congregation once a week, and you had access to your workforce 5 days a week. So what could you do with that? I believe that there's a story that you told, and so maybe you could. I'm thinking probably never went to business school, or if you did, that's not where you got your values from. So tell your story just a little bit, and then I'll proceed with this concept of what it means to have a new paradigm that's more in line with what you're already doing so well.
I think probably in a concise point, I have a traditional education in accounting, an MBA, Price Waterhouse, going into a family business, challenges of the family business, old technology. And I used the skills I was taught in business to try and create economic value. And I was a nice guy. We had a nice company. So the first 30 years of my career that ended up being very financially successful. I transformed the business, but it was about creating profits, organic growth, market share. And about 1997 through about 2002, I had a series of three revelations. I call them revelations because they just happened to occur to me. I didn't read a book. Nobody counseled me. We didn't have a problem I was going to solve. I just had a revelation. And the one you mentioned was my mentor was our rector of our church. Phenomenal gentleman, meant a lot to us. But one day after the sermon, I looked at my wife and I said, Cynthia, Ed has only got us for 1 hour a week. We have people for 40 hours a week in our care. And as I walked out of the church that day, I said, business could be the most powerful force for good in the world if we simply knew how to care for the people we had the privilege of leading. That was my, and the third revelation that the people remember the most, when I was at a wedding and watching two young couples and the pride of their families getting married. And I realized, because prior to that wedding, I was trained the way I saw people in our organization, 13,000 people around the world, as engineers, accountants, hourly workers, union workers, assistants. I saw them as functions for my success. I was a nice guy. We had a nice company. We were doing fine. But at that wedding, the experience I had is the lens through which I saw people was reversed. And instead of seeing people as a function, all of a sudden I saw people in my span of care as somebody's precious child who'd been placed in my care for 40 hours a week. And the way I would treat them would profoundly affect their health and the way they go home and treat their spouse and their kids and behave in our country. And what I realized is a profound sense of responsibility for the people. And I think it was capsulated by when Washington University organizational development professors interviewed me a few years ago. After an hour and a half interview, they said, "You're the first CEO we have ever talked to that never talked about your product."
Okay.
And I said, I've been talking about our product for the last hour and a half.
Yeah.
It's our people. I won't go to my grave proud of the machines we build. I'll go to my grave proud of the people who did that. Completely caught them off guard. So the lens, the main thing, my journey, those revelations changed the way I saw my sense of responsibility to the people whose lives were entrusted to me, and words matter. So that was really that revelation. And so today, and Raj is one of the people that saw it, that led us to a series of commitment to start converting managers into leaders who had the ability to care for the people they lead. It was a very internal organic initiative, no outside advisors, and people like Simon Sinek, Raj Sisodia, Bill Urey, the McKinsey people came in and kept saying, "I've never seen anything like this. How is it possible that this kid from North St. Louis with an accounting degree would have these revelations and create a business model that people of Raj's caliber and others that came in and said, I have
Yeah.
never
So that's
seen
how out of the
anything
box
like
it.
this." I believe without a shadow of a doubt today that some higher power is using us to show the world the way it was meant to be, where we care for the people we have the privilege of
So
leading.
just to bookmark this, both of you have a profoundly pro-social orientation. Your primary motivation is not self-serving. It's not even self-serving on the part of your company. It is it is pro-social towards your workforce, and of course the company has to do no harm either. So basically, this begins with a pro-social orientation. And then to leader, we'd want to add the adjective servant leader, as a phrase that I'm betting that both of you will approve of for sure. But so against that background now, where we have these that's so against the grain of business as usual, what would it be like? What would it be like if actually business as usual became centered on this? If there was some new foundation that was taught in business school. So business school would be the place where you would learn this, as opposed to what you had to, an obstacle that you had to overcome. So that's what's on offer. That's what I mean by the lens of a new paradigm. And it can be represented crudely by a single person, just as figures like Milton Friedman and Jack Welch are icons. And the fictional character of Gordon Gekko, Ayn Rand, these are all icons of the current dominant paradigm. And one icon of the new paradigm is Elinor Ostrom, and her 8 core design principles, which in a generalized form is a capsule of this new paradigm. And my claim is, which we're going to be discussing for the next segment of this talk, is that when you look at these 8 core design principles for good governance, then they fit Barry Waymiller like a glove, like a glove. And you didn't know about them. And that's not how you came by your practices. You just described how you came by your practices. But the fit with these core design principles is amazing. And Raj, because we've been interacting in this way for longer than I have with Bob, I wonder if you could take the next piece of this and just describe when we started to meet what that added to all that you're already doing, which is so great. You saw an added value, and we've actually done a podcast on your podcast on this. But tell us a little bit through your lens about what our relationship represents, and especially about Elinor Ostrom and these core design principles. And we'll provide a link to them in the liner notes so that our audience can actually have these in front of them when they're listening to this.
Yeah, so David, when I came across your work and the whole field of evolutionary biology and how that really explains human behavior and the success of Homo sapiens, it was really putting structure around something that I had felt. I never felt comfortable with the Homo economicus caricature of human beings, that we're only material and short-term and self-interested and all of that. That we are much more than that, right? We're cooperative, and we are rooted in altruism and love, and we are purpose-driven and so forth. So I think there's a richer picture of human beings that is missing in economics and in business school. In hindsight, if I look at my 6 years of business education, it was all about the head and the wallet, right? It's all about the frameworks and the theories and the numbers, and everything is about the bottom line, and you completely bypass the human being in between. So I was never inspired a single day in my business education, and I was never emotionally touched. My heart was never opened in those 6 years. And in the process of doing my work in firms of endearment, etc., those things changed dramatically. I was literally in tears as I was writing firms of endearment and telling some of those stories. And I said, my God, I haven't cried for 20 years, and now I'm crying because I'm writing about a company doing some wonderfully loving, caring things for their people. And I know when Bob gives his speeches, invariably he's moved to tears, and his audience is moved to tears. And these are very powerful things that defines us as human beings, right? What makes us different from other species? We have these capacities of empathy and caring and laughter and tears and all of these kinds of things. And we need to bring our whole human being into everything that we do, especially business, because we have such a deep impact, not only on the people who work in our companies, but the people we serve, our customers. Everybody is impacted in multiple ways through every business. And so when you became part of my consciousness and we met, and I started reading your books, and I couldn't stop reading them one after the other. It's rare this late in life to have discovered something that is intellectually so exciting and new for me, because it was never part of my education. We all have heard about Darwin, but we have a caricature view, survival of the fittest, and we just think it's about that. And so it really inspired me and spoke to me in a very deep way. And I said, yeah, this is the Holy Grail. This is what we're looking for. This is the new theoretical foundation that we need to adopt, because the world is a prisoner of bad ideas, more so than bad people.
Yeah.
It's bad
Oh, yeah.
ideas that
That's
dominate humanity.
yeah. There's a quote I have about
Yeah.
that. Raj, that of course means so much for me to have you say that. But I want to make a point that when you look at the courtesan principles, and we'll touch upon them very briefly now, Bob. I'm going to kind of ask you some questions with these. But what you find is that they're very external. They have to do with things like decision making and monitoring and conflict resolution and things which are not like emotionally loving. I mean, that's actually, but what they do when they're implemented, it's like the structure that enables loving behaviors to thrive. They provide the social environment where prosociality can survive. And so just to pick one of them, Bob, to ask you now, forget about the courtesan principles. I'm just going to ask you about Barry Wimmeler. How are decisions made? How do you engage people in decisions? Do you have like top-down decision making, or is decision making more equitable? Does everyone get a chance to have input in decisions? How do you what did you arrive at when it comes to decision making?
Well, I think you have to go back to kind of just step back a second and say, what I was taught in business school was I took management classes, got a management degree, and got a job as a manager. And so I thought from that training and education that I was supposed to manage people. And so, and I thought managing people was when people came to you with an issue, you would tell them what to do and they would do it, and it felt good when people would do things you tell them to do. That's the world that I saw, was educated, and I experienced out in the world. And the revelation is when we learn that the greatest of all leadership skills in every part of your life, including work and being a leader, is to listen with empathy. Okay, that is the greatest, because if you listen to him, this one gentleman who worked in this plant for 30 years, we acquired the company, said, I've worked here 30 years and nobody ever asked me what I thought. They told me what I to do. And what we've realized is that the people know what to do. There's just a way to ask them how to do it and engage them. And he said, since you bought the company and you now ask me what I thought, I get to work with my team members to make things better. I go home at night feeling better about myself. And when I feel better about myself, I'm nicer
Yeah.
to my
Yep.
wife. Okay. And so when you treat people with respect, when you ask them their input, when they feel that they matter, okay, which is asking them and sharing information with them, that it dramatic. So again, one of the things, David, I want your audience to hear is never in my education, never in my experience outside for 30 years, did I ever hear that the way I would run this company would affect people's health and affect people's marriages and their relationship with their kids. But when we teach people to be leaders, 90% of the feedback is how it affects their marriage and their relationship with their children. Okay, because leadership and parenting is identical. Okay, and never had occurred to me. So these were revelations to me from what I was educated and what I experienced in the world. And again, and that is why what Raj came in and saw when he came in to look at this model of a company compared to what he'd seen at Whole Foods. Raj saw people come to tears to talk about what it feels like to be cared for. Okay, so in terms of listening, in terms of leadership, leadership is stewardship of the people who you have the privilege of leading. And the word we use is not love. We genuinely care for the people we have the privilege of leading and treat them with respect and dignity. But again, it's not just about caring. You've got to remember, it's about people, purpose, and performance. It starts with our fundamental responsibility to the people whose lives we touch around a purpose that inspires them to share their gift, and then we have to
Okay,
create
so Bob,
value. We cannot be good to our team members if we don't
okay,
create
I got two
value.
more points. I just loving this. But so purpose. The Barry Wimmeler is a manufacturing company, and it makes stuff. That stuff is needed for society, but you wouldn't say that it's an exalted purpose. And so I want you to say more about purpose and why is it that you've more or less that for the people, for you and the people that you work for, there is such a strong sense of purpose when in fact the the company is making the stuff of the world, but how do you create this very, very strong sense of purpose? That, by the way, is the first core design principle.
Well, yeah. So I would say to you that I believe a leader's responsibility, whether the president of the United States, mayor of the city, president of a company, is to give those people in your care a grounded sense of hope for the future. That's your primary responsibility, okay? That they feel safe in your care, that they can come to work knowing that they can raise a family. And so in terms of that fabric, people respond dramatically when you share with them where you're going, why you're going there. That gives them a sense of purpose. And the other thing is that we do it for each other. If each of us comes in and brings our gifts fully and shares them towards the goals of the organization that we all know, we create a future for each other. That creates a purpose. When each of us bring our gifts, whether you're in the accounting department or in the machine shop and assembly, and we look around and we see our team members and we feel and we care for them, we want to do our job well for them, not just for me and my career and my advancement. So part of the purpose is this shared purpose of creating human and economic value together. Our people are proud of where they work. They feel valued. They go home at night and have better marriages and raise better kids. So remember, the Industrial Revolution, in theory, Raj gives an eloquent presentation on the benefits of the Industrial Revolution. Well, we thought it was good pay, good benefits, okay? And it turns out that a century later, we have the most prosperous economy in the world, and we have the highest level of depression, anxiety, and suicide we've ever had. Why? We've got economic prosperity because we don't have human prosperity. Okay, and Tom Friedman calls it poverty dignity. So what we do in purpose, we're inspired to bring our gifts towards a common goal of creating value, human and economic value. And Raj saw it. Raj flew around the world in London and Italy and France. Is a universal truth. People want to know they matter. And when they feel they matter, they will share gifts with you they didn't even know they had, not just for their own career, but for the benefit of their
Okay,
fellow team
Bob,
members.
this is so great. Raj, go ahead, and then I'm going to go into some more. But Raj, please take your turn.
Yeah, so if I could add to that, before I went to Barry Wehmiller, my sense of purpose was something we do for customers, right? That this is our purpose in the world and this is how we create value for customers. But when I went there and I talked to Bob and I observed the culture of the company, and when they say we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people, and when Bob says our purpose is our people, I realized that we have been missing a very important piece, right? That your purpose can be rooted and should be rooted in your people, and it can also be rooted in your products. But it's like a plane with two engines, right? Ideally, you want both. You want a people engine and you want a product or a customer engine. But if you had to pick one, you have to pick people. Because if you are doing something great for customers, but meanwhile your employees are suffering in the process, that's not okay, right? So it really opened my eyes to this idea of people being a purpose, and that makes it universal. Every company in the world has people, and therefore every company has the potential to have a higher purpose right
Yeah,
there in
this
front
is
of them, even if they're making products that are just bare necessities, right? They don't inspire people to, you know, get excited to go to
like
work and make
cardboard
enough of one of
boxes,
those
like
products.
cardboard
But
boxes.
yeah, exactly. But the people are
Okay,
always
this is so beautiful. Forgive me for being my timekeeper here because but I want to cover two more of the core design principles. One is um, monitoring, responding to helpful and unhelpful behavior. How do you monitor things so that we do what we agree upon to do? How do you reward helpful behavior, and how do you correct unhelpful behavior in a way that's compassionate? Um, so I think that this is another thing that Barry Waymiller does exceptionally well. And Bob, I invite you just to describe how is it that you provide an incentive system that both rewards good behavior and compassionately does something about unhelpful behavior. What would you say about that?
Well, that's a great question because one of the foundation, we believe in the goodness of people. We believe people come with the attitude to share their gifts. So we trust in the goodness of people. That's where we start. And what we learned in the early days is in raising kids, You need to find them doing things right 5 times more than things they should do better, so they can deal with it. That's a psychological factor in raising kids. Something I realize that. Well, we realize people at work are the same way. Okay. And so what we do to create that kind of attitude is that we constantly are looking for people doing good things and recognize them in thoughtful, appropriate, timely ways. Okay. So we're constantly looking and holding up behavior which inspires other people to behave in that way. And quite often I get the question, what do you do about the people that don't get it, Bob? What do you do about them? And it's a really easy answer for me. We treat them like we would like our son treated. In parenting, we call it hard love. Okay, when you're raising kids, it is not always doing what they want to do, but doing what's right for them. And so I would say to you, sometimes addressing issues with people is the best thing you can do for them and their guidance. So, but we do it with compassion and understanding. And Bill Urey of Harvard, when he experienced our culture, he said what he saw at Barry-Wehmiller is courageous patience. So the key thing, David, I want your audience to hear is we focus on the people that do get it, okay? And we have courageous patience. And Bill Urey described it like a bus going around in a circuit. The bus drives up and says, David, would you like to join us in this journey? And David said, I'm just not there yet. And we said, that's okay, David.
I
We'll
love
be
that.
back.
I love that,
Okay,
Bob.
and
I'm so
that's
happy that you brought that up yourself, because I was going to invite you to give that beautiful, beautiful metaphor. So I'm so happy that you just spontaneously gave it. I'm going to zip right on to the next one, which is related: conflict resolution. Conflict resolution. Conflicts will occur, and they need to be resolved in a way that is as quick as possible, and is regarded as fair by all parties. That's the wording of the design principles. So how do you deal with conflict resolution? This is right next door to what we've already been discussing.
Well, the easy answer is that when we began Barry-Wehmiller University to convert managers into leaders, people who have the skills and courage to care for the people they lead, we taught empathetic listening, which struck me as odd that we needed to teach adults to listen. But I would want your audience to hear it. It is the most profound thing we do to be caring and good stewards of people's lives, because when you show that you genuinely care, I guess we have conflict. I don't hear much about conflict in our company. I guess we have it. But what we do is we teach people, we teach listening all over the world, from India to Japan to China. Everywhere we teach people to listen with empathy. So the amount of conflict, I guess we have it. I don't hear much about it because we teach people to listen. And when you learn to listen, you learn to resolve issues like that, because part of the listening is constructive conflict resolution. Okay, that's part of what we teach people. So honestly, David, we probably have it someplace.
You're
Feel
very
it
lucky.
and
You're
hear it.
very, very lucky to be able to make that statement. I guess we have it, but
Well, David, I go around the world and I have listening sessions and I say, this is what we believe in. How are we doing? And I listen to people all over the world, and I hear constantly, it is dramatic. 90% of the feedback is how it affects their personal life. Okay. 90%. You know how that makes me feel? The healing power of business. That we could heal the brokenness in the world if we
yeah.
simply knew
Yeah. So
how to
Raj,
care
you
for
wrote a
these
whole
people.
book called The Healing Organization, and I think this is a good moment for us to expand the view a little bit to other companies that you profile, and then I'm going to move on to another segment. But please take your turn, Raj, about this whole concept of the healing organization.
Sure, and if I could just add one little note to what Bob just said. What I've seen at Barry Wehmiller is that when there are disagreements and people see things, they're brought up at an early stage and dealt with before they become very big conflicts. So, for example, at some of Bob's listening sessions, people will point out, here are things that the company is doing that are different from the words that you espouse. And the key thing there is to take immediate action to close those gaps. I think they call it mind the gap. Right? So anytime you see gaps, you start closing them. So it really sort of diffuses that potential big conflict that could arise over time, because you've taken care of it, you've kind of nipped it in the bud when it's early on. And that's why it's one of the companies that I've seen which has very little overt conflict. There's no negative gossip. People just talk about each other in a positive way for the most part. It's a very unusual culture in that way. So the idea of healing was really inspired by Bob, because when I was with him a few years after we wrote our book, and I asked him how he was doing, and he said, "Oh, I'm off to Europe, and we're looking at about a dozen acquisitions this year, and so I've got a busy week ahead of me." And at that point, I think they had acquired 108 companies, and I said, "Bob, I know you already have all these companies, and you've got 26 children and grandchildren. It might be more by now." And I said, "Why do you need the hassle? You could be just relaxing in Aspen and playing golf and enjoying your family and the fruits of everything you've created." And that's when he said to me, "Raj, at the end of my life, I will not be proud of the machines or the money we made, but the lives we touched." And I said, "Bob, you're not growing a business, you're spreading a healing ministry. That the more Barry Wehmiller grows, the better life gets for more people." Right? They never sell a single company. They've never sold a company. They adopt these companies.
We're going to get to that. That's actually the next segment, but keep going, Raj.
Yeah. And the more they grow, now this is not true in the world of business generally. When a company comes and acquires your company, what's going to happen? A bunch of people are going to get laid off. New managers are going to come in. Everybody's going to be put on aggressive cost-cutting targets, and it'll create enormous stress. This is what we contrast with a company called 3G Capital out of Brazil, which acquires a bunch of companies and does exactly that. So life gets pretty grim and dark when you get acquired by that kind of company, which has an empire-building energy, right? The modern empires are not the Alexander the Greats and all of that. They're the business empires. And those are built by conquest and hostile takeovers and massive human suffering at the core of it. And then you have this other model where you're growing like a healing ministry. And the more you... And Bob and leaders like him feel an obligation to grow, not a compulsion to grow. So these other companies, they have 18 billion and they want 30 billion, right? The three founders of 3G Capital all are in the 10 billion range. But there's a compulsion because there's never enough, because they measure themselves by that. Whereas with Bob, there's an obligation to grow because he knows that.
Yeah, let me set the stage for this a little more, and then pass to you, Bob, because people who don't know this are going to be amazed by what I'm about to say, which is that not only has Barry Wehmiller done this for itself, but it has not acquired but adopted. That's the word you like to use. Over 120, maybe the number is still larger at this point. Other companies, and transform them in the same way. And so from a scientific perspective, this is unbelievable. This is like an experiment that's been replicated 120 times, that you can buy a company, which often is a struggling company, and then you can transform its culture without firing its personnel for the most part, and you can do it again and again and again. So in other words, we know it works because it's been replicated that many times. And so I really want to hear, Bob, your view of how this happens. Just describe it in your own words. Is how are you able to perform this miracle again and again and again?
Well, one data point. I began to acquire companies in about 1985 because I said to myself, having struggled to take the historic business to its future, I said, I'm proud of our history, but our products don't give us a future. So we need to acquire companies that give us a better future. The only problem is I had no money. So that's how I began, probably over 140 adoptions now in my career around the world. And what I find, and people say, well, isn't it hard to have this caring culture when you are out adopting all these companies with different challenges? I said, it's the easiest thing we do. It's like feeding candy to kids. When we have the chance to adopt another company, it's like a church opening a church in another community. And I say to people, welcome to the family. You've got a good future with us. And people cry, okay? Because I remember this one lady said, I never thought I was going to get to work for a company that cared about me. Isn't that a sad statement? I never thought I was going to get to work for a company that cared about me. And I say to people, my responsibility is to give you now a good future, so you can have a sense of dignity and safety. And people don't believe it. They can't believe it because they've never been cared for. They've been used to achieve financial goals and discarded. I mean, when you look at the layoffs occurring now in major corporations and the brutality in which people are let go, and you wonder why we have this poverty of dignity in this world, as Tom Friedman says, because when people don't, we think if we pay them well and give benefits, we've given back to society. In fact, it's not about paying benefits. It's about have you treated those people with respect and dignity so that when they go home at night, they know who they are and what they do matters. That is the healing power of business. When you see your purpose as your people, now you need a product, you need a service, you need financial responsibility. That's just like, if you're raising kids, you need a job, you need a home, there are things you need. But if you're focused, when you look at the people that you have the privilege of leading as somebody's precious child, and you treat them as you would want your child treated, so that they can be who they're intended to be and appreciated for whatever that is, it changes everything. We could heal the world. So again, this adoption of companies. Right now, we're at a fairly good pace of adopting companies, and virtually everyone, the most material factor is our culture. People can't
But you're
believe
saying it's
that we
easy.
are real
So
because
often,
they have
Bob,
no
it's
option.
it's it's difficult to get from here to there. That you want to get to some, you want change to occur, but it's hard. Change is hard. But you're actually saying that it's easy. That when you offer this proposition of just such a more humane way of doing things, people are starving for it, and they can move in that direction. There's not like a barrier to it, is what you're saying, which is makes it even more extraordinary. It's not.
The beauty is the mentality of the leader, that thinking is hard. When you treat people with respect and dignity, you give them the confidence that what you're doing is trying to give them a good future so they can decide to buy a home, raise a family, to have some stability in their life. And when they actually feel that way, you will not believe the response of people when you
But you
show
must have
that
a
you care
routine
for
for
them.
doing that
Okay.
now. I mean, what actually happens when you go in and some of your people go in and they start to implement this, educate people, train them, all of this? There has to be quite a lot of structure around that. I'm sure there is. And
We've got a play pattern. Yeah, we've got to play back. We don't acquire any company that we don't adopt any company that we can't think we can make better. Okay. And from our experience of over 140 acquisitions, we have a sense of that. So we sit down and we say, I just visited a small company in Minnesota that we adopted recently. And, nice family company, but the culture today, since we stepped into that company, they say is dramatically even better than it was before we did it because they feel safe, they feel part of the company, they don't feel used, they're not going to be sold. Again, David, when Tom Friedman captured this expression, we have a poverty of dignity in this country, not a poverty of money. And dignity means I don't feel valued, okay? And when we have people in our care for 40 hours a week, we can profoundly affect their dignity. And once they go home and they treat their spouse better and their children see the behavior of their parents more loving, and then we can start dealing with these children's issues who are raised in homes where parents come home drained by being fired or manipulated or downsized. And so we are self-destructing for economic gain. And we think if we make money, it's happy because we define success as money, power, and position. It doesn't matter how you get it, as long as you get it. And then you can write checks to charity and everybody will say you're a wonderful person, okay? Uh, and again, I say to you and your audience, the greatest act of charity is not the checks you write. The greatest act of charity is how you treat the people
now I
you have
have
the
one
privilege
more
of leading.
segment of this to cover with you, and I'm so happy for this, grateful for this conversation. And the final segment, I invite both of you to take in turn, has to do with um, graduating from the individual company to the whole cultural ecosystem. In other words, how does a company behave outside itself? And the insight, the theoretical insight, is that the same principles apply. In other words, your conduct towards, just like the conduct of an individual towards other individuals, the conduct of a company towards their supply chain, their customers, the environment, the whole outside world needs to embody these same pro-social principles, the same core design principles. And I think that I'd love you to comment on just how you view the role of a company in the construction of a much larger ecosystem, ultimately the whole world, because ultimately this leads to a whole earth ethos that first and foremost, I'm a human being and citizen of the world. And then everything else that I am, all my lower level identities, have to be coordinated. They're important, but they have to be coordinated with the global good in mind, is the way that I would put it. But I'd love to hear your reflection on that and your own way of putting it. And Raj, maybe you'd like to take the first turn and then.
Sure. So I think one of the great possibilities and also realities that we have seen in conscious companies that once they adopt this way of being and their consciousness is awakened in this way, that it then becomes a possibility to spread this and to catalyze change throughout their value chain, right? So they can then work with their suppliers. So for example, we have some companies that we work with here in Mexico, and now they're bringing their suppliers into the same programs, the executive education program, so that their suppliers too can now start to operate in this way, right? So ultimately you want to be the catalyst for change up and down the value chain, regardless of where you are in that value chain. You could be at the very top or you could be at the very bottom. That possibility exists, and there's some interesting methodologies that exist for that. There's one called appreciative inquiry, which is basically getting the whole system in the room. Right? So you've got the company, the leadership of the company, you get a group of employees at different levels, you get customers of different types, you get suppliers, you get your investors, you get community members, and whoever else really is an important stakeholder. And then about over a 3-day period, you actually dream and design and prototype what is the next growth and the next stage of evolution of this company. And everybody is participating in that. Your suppliers are helping you come up with your vision and great ideas and so forth. And customers are, talking with suppliers and they're talking about your company. And what typically happens is that you do that, and then the supplier might have their own appreciative inquiry summit. And then you show up there as a customer and you put on that hat with them and help them now to transform in a big way. So again, it really starts to create this ripple effect, and the whole fabric is strengthened, and every one of those companies starts to function at a much higher
Thank
level.
you so
So
much.
it's a beautiful,
Very, very
positive
clear.
competing
Very, very
environment.
clear. Bob, how about you?
Yeah, well, Dave, I want to answer that question well. I want to start with we have this guiding principle of leadership that Raj mentioned that inspires our behavior, which is we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people. And that principle articulated then in our guiding principle of leadership is what we have found is that when we treat our people with respect and dignity, they treat others with respect and dignity. Okay, and the bad news about COVID that we all experienced, it was highly contagious. The good news about caring, it's even more contagious than COVID. So I would say to you, when we teach at Barry Windmill University empathetic listening, how to recognize the goodness in others, and a culture of service, seizing the opportunity to serve others, that our our customers feel cared for because they're dealing with people. How can people care for our customers if they don't feel cared for themselves? Okay. So I would say to you, we teach internally how to care for each other, which is listening with empathy, recognition, celebration. And the result is that we treat our customers, we treat our suppliers, we treat our communities, the compassion and understanding. And we've created, again, David, it still astounds me, but through those revelations, people like Raj, Simon Sinek, Bill Urey, the McKinsey partners, the Harvard professors, everybody who has come into our big operations and talked to our people say, I have never seen anything like this. That is why we were blessed. It was an eclectic journey that people of Raj's caliber. I mean, Raj didn't want to write a book. He came, because he was bored one day and decided to go look. But he saw something he'd never seen before. And he saw grown men and women come to tears talking about what this meant to them. So I would say to you, David, this eclectic journey of learning to care for each other is created. We could solve the issues of the world if we would embrace this. And that's why we feel compelled to share this with people like you in the world. We have been blessed with a model that could heal the brokenness we're all feeling in the world. Because if we send people home to feeling cared for, they will care for their kids, their fellow
Yeah,
citizens,
well,
their
I
country,
want
and
to
the
end
world.
this wonderful, wonderful conversation with a reflection on what you just said, Bob, because what you just said is that people observe this and they say, I have never seen anything like this. And yet, when you view it through a different lens, you find that the evidence for it is hiding in plain sight. Positive examples are all around us. And we have people like you and like the other companies, the Raj profiles. We have methods such as appreciative inquiry. So people are actually arriving at these solutions again and again and again. The management literature is just full of them, and yet people don't see it. It's invisible to them because of their current lens. And when you adopt the different lens, then all the evidence that you could want for is just as if you don't have to do a single additional study, where just all the evidence and all the methods that you need are just hiding in plain sight once we know what to attend to. And so that's, to me, is the lens of a new paradigm, viewing conscious capitalism through the lens of a new paradigm, which I would like to think is the primary contribution of this podcast compared to the many, many, many other podcasts and other forms of venues that you have participated in. Despite your fame, I think for me what the new element here is just that, is how we can see this all around us, basically, and build upon it. And then please let me go.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'd leave that one statement. Our purpose is our people. Okay, and that would be the simple way to say it. To send people home knowing that who they are and what they do matters, and we could heal this brokenness we're all feeling in the world. It is, we don't need to change the laws or chase taxes. We just need to learn to care, which
And your
starts with
point that
listening with
compassion,
empathy.
how did you put it? Say it again, that you said that care spreads faster than, what did you say? What?
Now, well, we didn't know this when we started as a result, but when we started teaching people to listen and therefore and show that we cared for them, we found that it released in them the capacity when they felt safe and valued to care for others. So again, COVID was highly contagious, which was bad. The good news about caring, we have found
Yeah.
it is more contagious than COVID. It spreads naturally because we have this natural capacity to care for others that has been tamped down and a lid put on it because of management, bosses, and supervisors. So again, if you, Raj has seen it all over the world. You would come to tears if you listen to some of our people talk about what it feels to be, part of an organization where they feel valued, safe, and can live a life of meaning and purpose with others, and which creates that community of feeling. It's not just individuals. So again, I would say to you, I can't believe we've been blessed with this. With my background, it doesn't make sense, but it's so simple. We just need to learn to care. It's a skill, just like language is a skill. And it turns out what we started teaching at Barrymore University is how to care for others. And again, people, purpose, and performance. But to every leader listening to this, your primary responsibility is to give those people in your care a grounded sense of hope for the future so they can raise a family
Thank you,
and
Bob.
live in peace with
Raj, you
each
get the
other.
last word.
I think the great challenge before us as we seek to bring about this shift, the paradigm shift, as you know, a lot of people are deeply invested in the existing paradigm. And if their value system only consists of ego and power and money, then that existing paradigm has served them well, those in positions of leadership. I think there's a famous quote that it's very hard to get somebody to change their mind when their income and their salary depends on them not understanding something, right? It's hard to get them to understand something. So people who only care about money, and they've done very well under that scenario, they don't want to know this. They don't want to change because to them the existing way of doing things is working. But it really goes back to that, those people are not connected to their humanity. And we've kind of created almost this sociopathic mindset in people that business is only about this, and therefore to be a leader you have to adopt that exact same value system of only about shareholder value and profit. So it kind of makes us into sociopathic beings. and that can become pretty hardwired over time. And when everybody around you has that same worldview, it becomes mutually reinforcing. So I think breaking out of that is the great challenge. How do we touch people's hearts? And Bob does 80, 90 speeches all over the world. I do a lot of speaking. We're trying to reach people at that level. But there's some people that have built a Fort Knox around that. Okay, you
Yeah,
cannot go there, right? They don't want to be
yeah, yeah.
emotionally
So
touched at all because it would
yeah, and
threaten their
ultimately,
entire
so it's a
worldview.
combination of changing minds and then changing rules and structures and norms and ultimately power distribution of power. All of these things have to take place.
It's ultimately, until we change business education, we won't fix this. Business education teaches us academic skills to become an accountant, a marketing, a production, an engineer. It doesn't teach us human skills, and so we are producing a bad product out of our universities. So our universities need to own that we need to start integrating human skills with academic skills to create tomorrow's leaders who have the
That's a
courage
great
and
way to end
capacity to
because it
care.
passes right on to other people that we're working with. Especially, I'll shout out to Michael Pearson and his Humanistic Management, International Humanistic Management Association, and the need to do exactly that, to rethink the theoretical foundation of business school education is part of the project. And I think that is in progress. And that's one reason why the new paradigm needs a new paradigm coalition, which we are building. And so here we are, and I think that this podcast is going to be a huge boost to the New Paradigm Coalition movement because it articulates what it means to have a new paradigm. So I'm so grateful to both of you for this hour that we have spent and so eager to share it far and wide. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for your interest.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
Thanks.